and personification throughout the story. Welcome to the first episode of Spilt Milk. We're going to do a novel review of Roddy Doyle's A Star Called Henry.
We had to make this podcast, so you guys get to listen to it, so sit tight. Henry is over 6'2" by the time he's 14, and he lives on the streets his whole life. And also at 14, he enlists in the Irish Citizen Army and contributes to the Easter Uprising in 1916 against the British rule.
And in the midst of this, he has sexual relations with his kindergarten teacher, Miss O'Shaw, which later becomes his wife. So, the protagonist of the story is who we're going to do a deep dive on. His name is Henry Smart. As a young boy, he was rejected by his parents because his mother named their first child, who ended up a miscarriage, Henry Smart, and that's where the name of the book comes from, A Star Called Henry. And for a while there, she wouldn't call him by his name.
His father worked as a bouncer.
Henry didn't get along well with his parents. His dad was a bouncer and his mom was like a gypsy.
His dad was also a hitman.
Yeah, his dad was also a hitman, and he lived on the streets since he was 8.
He had to witness his younger brother Victor die in his arms on a cold, rainy night, and holds that with him.
His father also leaves him a wooden leg as his spare wooden leg as a gift.
Yeah. Which he eventually beats the crap out of somebody with.
Yeah.
Specifically, O'Gadden, which is the guy that enlisted his father and ended up getting him thrown in jail. Well, maybe not thrown in jail, just made him disappear.
Okay, so Roddy Doyle, born in May 8th, 1958. He's an Irish novelist. He writes only really much about Ireland. And he was also born in Dublin, where the story takes place. He graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University College of Dublin. He spent several years as an English and geography teacher, becoming a full-time writer in '93. And he wrote lots of short stories, 11 books for adults, lots of screenplays, and several of his books became films, like Paddy Clarke, Ha Ha Ha. It's a pretty cool one.
Cool. What did you think about the setting of the book? How did it pertain to the story?
It's very dreary.
Dreary.
Rains a lot.
Ireland's not much of a place to want to live.
Anywhere up there, England or somewhere.
Really violent. They race rats for fun.
Yeah,
Which makes no sense. Yeah.
Didn't they steal a cow and cook it over a street fire?
They stole
the cow and killed
beat
it.
it up in the street, and then ate it raw over a fire. Like animals.
What do you think the literary significance of the novel was?
Historical insight into that time.
Right.
With the tensions between the English and the Irish building up and kind of showing them how the British treat the Irish pretty much the whole entire, or throughout human history.
Mm-hmm.
That's how they treat them the whole time. Just a bunch of, not
right.
very well.
I like your response. I'm thinking that it unveils a dark side of history as well, because it's mob bosses, it's people getting killed on orders, and yeah, it's not good stuff.
Yeah, we were originally trying to read a book about the mob.
The Sicilian mob?
The mob. Now we got here.
3 literary elements that stuck out to me were extended metaphors, 2 of them to be exact, and the theme. The theme was pressure forms diamonds. Henry Smart is subject to the harsh living conditions of Ireland, where survival is most goal. Despite the pressure that cracks most, Henry was able to find some purpose in his life. That's good.
That's really good.
And as for extended metaphors, we see a couple different ones. We see one with the wooden leg in which Henry's father entrusts to him. The leg represents loneliness in that Smart lacks paternal support from his father, and serves as a reminder that he was unable to foster his brother through the cold streets of Ireland.
Yeah, also his dad is a terrible dad.
That's true.
His dad killed a police officer right when he was
Yeah,
born.
his dad said, "You here to collect the rent?" Wow, not anymore.
As for another extended metaphor I had was the star called Henry, which is the title of the book. It's representative of the resentment towards Henry, the one that was born. It also signifies the disconnect in Henry's own self-worth because he feels he is being compared to someone that didn't survive the womb, nonetheless Ireland. Later, the meaning of the star shifts in that loved ones who passed are stars like Henry. Victor and members of the IRA are examples.
The IRA is the rebellion people.
There you go. Good to add that in.
3 pieces of literature that we picked out from that same time period was the quote by one of the leaders of the Easter Rising in 1916. He said that Ireland unfree shall never be at peace, and this really shows how big the conflict was in Ireland under the British oppression and how they were pretty determined to get their freedom back. And then we have an image here of the conflict where they're fighting not on a battlefield but in a civilian place, like the soldiers are standing on the table and shooting out the window into like a public street, and it kind of is indicative of all the violence that went on in that time period. And then we have a quote called "The Mother" that was written during this time period about Dublin and the violence that went on there. It said, "I do not grudge them, Lord, I do not grudge them. My 2 strong sons that I have seen go out to break their strength and die, they and a few, in bloody protest for a glorious thing, they shall be spoken of among their people. The generation shall remember them and call them blessed, but I will speak their names to my own heart." And that's kind of like the perspective of a mother looking out at like all this violence and lots of people just dying in these conflicts because it was just civilian uprising against military efforts by the British. So they didn't really stand a chance with to begin with. They were just showing that they did not want to be ruled by Britain.
Cool. Good stuff. A couple generated questions from our literary elements. For the first question of a literary element that we had, what best defines Henry as a diamond? Or is he just a gem in the rut? I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know if I'd get there. But I was still alive. I was 20. I was Henry Spart. Page 342. Henry had endured so much, and some might suggest his in-the-moment optimism is representative enough of his growth. As for the imagery in the book, the question was, how does the imagery throughout the book elevate the reader's perception? In lines such as stale Irish air on page 248, we get a sense of, a sense. And personification throughout the story. Personification throughout is used in order to strengthen the reader's understanding of each scene.
Oof. So the close reading piece I chose to look into was the section where Henry Smart takes this a member of the IRA out to dinner, and he suspects him of being a traitor, and by the end of the night he's kind of convinced himself that he is a traitor, and then he shoots him in the back of the head in a back alley right before the sun comes up. And the reason I picked this section is that it highlights Henry's very controlled, almost emotionless manner. The dialogue is very one-sided. Henry never says more than 10 words at a time, while Jack, the guy he's like interrogating, is pouring out like paragraphs and paragraphs. And the dialogue will be interrupted by Henry's thoughts, and his thoughts are very dark and like even vulgar, and that doesn't match his words that or the conversation that he's having with Jack at all. And it kind of reveals how he can put on one face while he contemplates something else in his head. And then at the end of the section when he actually kills Jack, it just point blank says it, like, I took him out, I asked him if he said his prayers, and I shot him in the back of the head. Like, there's more of his affinity for whiskey and his passion for Dublin and how much he hates the smell of the bar than it is for the feelings and the action and the description of literally killing somebody. So it was kind of shows how he's just so hardened to that experience and how he doesn't receive any joy from doing it, but he also doesn't feel any remorse or pain. It's just what he does.
Nice. Good stuff.